Tell me in a sentence who you are.
Nobody. I'm nobody. I'm a tramp, a bum, a hobo. I'm a boxcar and a jug of wine. And a straight razor if you get too close to me.
Behind the facade of innocence, darkness lurks. A world where truth is twisted and loyalty is demanded. They prey on the vulnerable, manipulate the minds, and commit unspeakable acts. Throughout history, cults have cast long shadows. They promise salvation, but deliver damnation. Welcome to the world of cultish crimes. Imagine a man who is able to convince a group of people that he is the second coming of Jesus Christ and the devil. Well, in today's case, we will be talking about a man who did just that. He is one of America's most notorious criminals and the charismatic mastermind behind a series of gruesome murders that shocked the world. But let's go back to the beginning.
Helter Skelter.
Charles Manson was born on the 12th of November 1934 in Cincinnati, Ohio. He was the son of a 16-year-old sex worker named Kathleen Maddox. Charles never knew his dad, and the only information that we could find on him was that he was most likely a man named Colonel Scott, who dated Kathleen briefly. And by the way, he wasn't Colonel like it wasn't some type of title of his. It was actually his name that he used to scam people, including Charles's mom, Kathleen. But when Kathleen told Colonel that she was pregnant, he split. Later on, he would pass away from liver disease before Charles ever had the opportunity to meet him. But while Kathleen was still pregnant, she met and married a man named William Eugene Manson, and this is where Charles got his surname. Sadly, the marriage only lasted 2.5 years. And everybody called Charles Charlie, so from here on out, I'm going to refer to him as that too. Charlie didn't have the best childhood. It was dysfunctional most of the time. His mom became a heavy drinker and a petty thief. It is rumored that she didn't even want Charlie and even tried to sell him once to a waitress in return for some beer. Eventually, her crimes escalated and she committed armed robbery at a gas station alongside her brother Luther. And in 1939, when Charlie was only 5 years old, she was sentenced to prison. Charlie was then placed with his Aunt Glenna and Uncle Bill and their daughter Joanna, who lived in McMicken, West Virginia. Even at this young age, when Charlie entered their home, he was difficult to manage. He was unruly and struggled to follow the rules of the house, but they were adamant to help him. They were extremely religious and would often take Charlie to visit his mom in prison. And while it's not ideal for any child to grow up without their mother, Charlie actually had it really good with his aunt and uncle. They had a decent home, they had great values, good morals, and they really wanted to do the best that they could for him.
The house was a big, older house, but it was beautiful. He had just about anything he wanted, I would say. His aunt and uncle and grandmother took him to church. He didn't like going. The only thing he really liked, was the singing. But Charles loved to sing.
But Charlie also spent a lot of time with another uncle of his who lived in the Kentucky mountains, and this uncle would fill his head with all sorts of ideas about the government and religion.
Out of the Kentucky mountains, when my uncle said, "We ain't surrendered, we're still rebels, and we'll be rebels until the end of time, because I ain't accepting no Yankee school." He said, "Don't go to those schools, boy." So when I was 9 years old, I set the school on fire, and I went to reform school.
And according to Charlie, after his uncle told him all of this stuff, he actually went on to burn down his school. But there are no records of this whatsoever, so I was actually a bit reluctant to add it in here. even though I don't find it very hard to believe. After 5 years behind bars, Charlie's mom, Kathleen, was released. But she didn't exactly turn her life around. In fact, it has been reported that she had numerous men in and out of her life. Then in 1947, she tried to put Charlie into foster care, but the court ordered him to be sent to the Gebolt School for Boys in Indiana. The Gebolt School was a home for wayward boys, a very strict school where punishment for even the smallest things included beatings with leather straps or wooden paddles. 10 months later, Charlie ran away and lived in the woods and on the streets for a while, and then went in search of his mom. He eventually found his mom, but she wasn't willing to take care of him, so she returned him to the school for boys.
The only thing my mother taught me was that everything she said was a lie. And I learned never to believe anyone about anything.
Nevertheless, Charlie seemed to follow in his mom's footsteps. He ran away from the Gebolt School for Boys again, and his first known crime was for the burglary of a grocery store in 1948 when Charlie was only 13 years old. He was apprehended and sent to a juvenile detention center. He made an escape 4 days later, and while a fugitive, he committed another 2 armed robberies. But he was soon apprehended again, and then was sent to the Indiana School for Boys in Plainfield, where he spent the next 3 years, except for brief periods of freedom during 18 escapes. Charlie has claimed that he was brutally SA'd and horribly abused in the School for Boys and was always just looking for a way to get out of there and to escape. In 1951, Charlie escaped this school for boys along with a boy named Blackie Nielsen, and they headed west in a stolen car. Charlie burglarized 15 to 20 gas stations along the way. He was caught in Utah and sent to the National Training School for Boys in Washington, D.C. A psychiatrist there said Charlie was a slick but extremely sensitive boy. Although we have no proof of Charlie's claims that he was SA'd and abused in those schools for boys, it's really not difficult to believe if you think about how many different schools for boys he attended and how many juvenile detention centers he was at. In fact, this could be why he would go on to commit his next crime, which was way more brutal than any other crime he had committed before at this point. Because in 1952, when Charlie was only 17 years old, he held a razor to a boy's throat while he sodomized him. For this brutal crime, he was transferred to Federal Reformatory at Petersburg, Virginia. Later that same year, when he turned 18, he was moved to a more secure reformatory in Ohio. Eventually, Charlie was released from prison and he met a hospital waitress by the name of Rosalie Jean Willis. In January of 1955, Charlie and Rosalie tied the knot and soon had a son together they named Charles Jr. They then moved to California and tried to make a life for themselves there. Charlie provided for his family by working as a parking lot attendant and a busboy, but he of course had his side hustle, which was stealing cars, and it wasn't very long until Charlie was arrested for auto theft. He was sentenced to 5 years probation, but only 1 year later in 1956, he was sentenced to 3 years in prison in California for violating the terms of his 1955 probation. In 1958, Rosalie had enough of Charlie's antics and divorced him and got full custody of Charles Jr. That same year, Charles was released and he was back out on the streets. When Charlie was in prison, he knew that he would be released eventually, but he would have nowhere to go. And that's when he decided to pick up some tips and tricks from other inmates. And once he was released, he decided to take another path on his criminal journey, and he became a pimp in Southern California. But Charlie was also still getting up to his old tricks, because in 1959 he was arrested for forging a treasury check, but was given a 10-year suspended sentence. While trying to make a living as a pimp, Charlie met a woman named Leona Stevens. Leona was only 19 years old at the time, and she was a prostitute, and everybody called her Candy. In January of 1960, Charlie and Leona got married, and soon after that had a son together named Charles Luther. But only a little over 2 months later, Charlie was arrested once again and sent to prison to serve the 10-year sentence that had been suspended in 1959 for the treasury check he forged. The crazy thing about this is that the check was reportedly only for $43.
I was struck by something initially, and that is that he had been sentenced to 10 years for attempting to cash a $43 treasury check, and he did 7.5 years.
In 1961, he was transferred to a federal penitentiary at McNeil Island in Washington. This is also around the time that Charlie claimed to be a Scientologist.
When he was in Terminal Island, there was a Scientologist. Manson picked up on this, and he did 150 hours of auditing, which is the Scientology term for counselling. And Manson started writing songs. What he was doing, which is quite revolutionary for the time, he started imbuing these songs with much of the philosophies that he was picking up from Scientology and also from his observations of human nature. So I think certainly Manson at that point, he's actually left the persona of the petty criminal and he's coming into his own.
Why am I not surprised? But hey, Scientology is another cult for another day. In 1963, Leona divorced Charlie, and a year later he learned how to play the steel guitar in prison. This became a massive part of Charlie's life. He was obsessed with the band, the Beatles, and this is where he started dreaming about becoming a star. He aspired to become a singer-songwriter and devoted most of his spare time in prison to the task. In early 1967, Phil Kaufman met Charlie in prison and heard him sing and play the guitar. Phil immediately noted that Charlie was talented. Phil and Charlie became close friends in prison and planned on connecting with each other once both of them got out. But this stint in prison also changed the way that Charlie started to view the world.
See, I never realized that people outside are much different than the people inside. People inside, if you lie, you get punched. You get misused. You don't lie to the lieutenant. Lieutenant don't lie to you. There's a certain amount of truth in prison, and being raised in prison, I was raised pretty much in the light of that truth.
On the 21st of March 1967, Charlie was released and was a free man once again. But despite his dreams, it seemed like he feared the outside world because he begged the authorities to keep him in prison. But the authorities declined and they released Charlie, and he decided to head to San Francisco. This was the era of the hippies, and everyone called it the summer of love. And this way of life suited Charlie just fine. He would sing and play his guitar on the streets, and people were really drawn to him. Just about a month after his release from prison, Charlie met a librarian named Mary Bruner. It was like he put a spell on Mary, and she gave birth to his third child, and they named him Valentine Michael. Mary was one of Charlie's first followers, and then he met Susan Atkins.
She had a tough start in life. On top of a broken home, on top of child abuse, Susan Atkins had to suffer the death of her mother from cancer. And she was, come puberty, pretty wild. So wild that her family couldn't contain her. And like many others, she headed off to San Francisco, where she worked variously as a waitress and as a topless go-go dancer. She came across Manson quite early on in the history of the Manson family, and he was able to assume a fatherly role with her, which is a template for what went on with the other girls.
Just like with Mary, it seemed like Charlie had put a spell on Susan, and she very quickly fell for his charm and way of thinking. He also met a handsome young man named Tex Watson.
Tex was kind of happy-go-lucky. He didn't challenge Charlie for leadership at all. He did what Charlie told him to do.
Then Charlie met a lady named Patricia Krenwinkel.
Also joining the group in 1967 would be 20-year-old Patricia Krenwinkel, later renamed by Charlie as Katie.
Patricia was self-conscious. She felt unloved. She felt ugly. But Charlie made her feel special, beautiful, and loved.
Patricia Krenwinkel talked about meeting Charlie, and she met him down at the beach, and he took her to an apartment and had her take off all her clothes and look at herself in a full-length mirror and say, "Isn't that the most beautiful thing you've ever seen?"
I think it's reasonable to assume that after he successfully managed to convince quite a few people to follow his way of life and thinking, he became quite confident with the idea that he could be a leader of a large group of people. Maybe this is when he realized how much he enjoyed to control people. Charlie started to set himself up as a self-proclaimed guru, and he managed to recruit many people, mostly women, but there were a few men too. Eventually, Charlie and his group managed to get an old school bus and they toured around California in it. And of course, this helped Charlie to recruit even more people, including a beautiful young woman by the name of Barbara Hoyt.
He was definitely a father figure to everybody. I admired him. He was a very charismatic person. Everybody gave me lots of attention. They're all very nice to me. I think the acceptance I felt was a very strong draw, and I think that was probably one of the main draws to the cult, to probably anybody.
Charlie also met a young lady named Leslie Van Houten, and she quickly became part of his group.
Leslie Van Houten was from Monrovia, and by all accounts, just a really all-American type girl. She was a homecoming princess at Monrovia High School.
Before you knew it, Charlie had a large group of followers that were hanging on his every word. They listened to what he taught them. They listened to him sing and play the guitar and even joined in on his songs with their own instruments. This group included Tex Watson, Steve Grogan, Bobby Beausoleil, Lynette Fromm, Virginia Castro, Patricia Krenwinkel, Susan Atkins, Leslie Van Houten, Catherine Shea, and Barbara Hoyt. He named his group the Manson Family, and they all lived together. Phil Kaufman, who befriended Charlie in prison, was released that year too, and he also went and joined Charlie's group.
It was incredible. It was sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
In 1968, Charlie and his Manson family moved to the Spahn Ranch site in Los Angeles. It was a former movie set owned by an old man named George Spahn. George was going blind and was struggling on his own on the ranch. He allowed Charlie and his followers to live there rent-free in exchange for labor. All they had to do was take care of the place. Rumor has it, Charlie also sent his girls over there to do sexual favors for the old man as part of the deal. Altogether at this point, there were 32 adults and 7 children who were living on the ranch. Charlie was a master manipulator and sold the idea of being free to his group of followers.
A typical day would be Charlie playing guitar, telling stories, dancing around, just being free. And it was actually beautiful.
Remember, this was the hippie era, and he made his way of life and thinking very appealing to them. He made them feel like family and that he was taking care of them. He even gave some of his followers, especially the women, new names and urged them to leave their past behind them and to focus on their new life with him.
The philosophy was that everything you learned was wrong, so we're going to erase your mind and make it childlike.
They all continued to live together and would share everything. And I do mean everything. They would often do illegal substances together, and one of their favorite things to do was to trip on LSD and have group sex.
There was a situation that was planned. We were going to have an orgy, drop acid, and make love. Just kind of got heated up. There was nothing bad or wicked or evil or wrong about it. It just all felt good, all felt right. Just dancing crazy, wildly, with no inhibitions. Everybody's just kind of flowing, and it's just beautiful.
Charlie would also frequently use LSD. Reportedly, he would use it up to 3 to 4 times a week with his followers. But on the nights he wanted to do some serious indoctrinating, he would refrain and only let his followers do it so that he could convince them of whatever he wanted to. Eventually, he had every single person who was part of his Manson family convinced that he was Jesus Christ and the devil all in one. They believed that Charlie could read their minds, that he could hear their thoughts, and they were so devoted to him, they would do anything for Charlie. But what Charlie really wanted was to become a rock star. That was the ultimate dream for him. And by a stroke of luck, he managed to connect with Dennis Wilson, who was the drummer for the famous band The Beach Boys.
Dennis had picked up Patricia Krenwinkel and another member of the family hitchhiking on Pacific Coast Highway in Malibu, and he brought them back to his home on Sunset Boulevard.
Of course, Patricia went to Charlie and told him all about Dennis Wilson. And the next day, when Dennis came home, he noticed that Charlie, along with his entire Manson family, were sitting in his lounge making themselves comfortable. They actually ended up living there for a while.
Dennis Wilson, I believe, was fascinated with Charlie's mind and the kind of music he wrote. He was bored with the Beach Boy sound, and he wanted to do something more. And Dennis himself tried to record the family, Charlie and the family, several times at his recording studio at his brother's house. He saw great potential in Charlie. Dennis thought that Charlie could be a rock star. He introduced Charlie to people in Hollywood, and he was always talking him up, telling whoever that they should listen to him. Dennis took Charlie to parties. At one of the parties was Terry Melcher, and he introduced him to Terry Melcher, who was Doris Day's son.
These introductions managed to get Charlie the opportunity to try and record some of his songs, but sadly, it didn't go very well.
They may have wore bell-bottom powers, had long hair, but they were businessmen, and Charlie and the family were hippies, and they wanted to do hippie music.
And to be fair, Charlie had some success with this. In fact, in 1968, the Beach Boys recorded one of Charlie's songs, Cease to Exist. But they renamed it Never Learn Not to Love. But they never gave Charlie any credit for it. Charlie was furious, of course, because he had an agreement with the Beach Boys that they could buy his song, but they were not allowed to alter it in any way. Of course, the Beach Boys ignored the agreement that they had with Charlie and they altered the song. Then in retaliation, Charlie went to Dennis's home and delivered a bullet as a symbolic threat. And then I don't know if this is true at all, but there are rumors that claim that Dennis actually beat Charlie up after that. So that was the end of that friendship. But Charlie tried again and again and again to secure a record contract with Terry Melcher, but he was unsuccessful. Terry Melcher actually reportedly went to listen to Charles and his Manson family, and Charlie was extremely nervous. He believed that Terry could make him a star. And reportedly, Terry led Charlie on to believe that they had some sort of deal and said that he would call him, but he never did. And you have to remember, Charlie had spent most of his life in reform school or prison. He didn't know anything about what the music industry or that world was like at all. I think we are all now wiser to all of that since we have the internet and we see all of these stories coming out. But when somebody gave Charlie their word or said that they had a deal and they would call him, he expected them to call him. He had no idea what Hollywood was like and that it was filled with liars and who knows what else, you know. So he believed Terry and was very disappointed when he didn't come through. Then, former fellow inmate, friend and follower Phil Kaufman decided that he wanted to leave the Manson family. He said he didn't believe in Charlie's philosophy anymore and he wanted out.
Charles and I drove up to San Francisco, just the two of us. It was at that time when the philosophy of the hippies was, do your own thing, man. You know, don't let the man get you. Do your own thing. And I kept saying that, and Charlie kept saying, no, you're not doing your own thing. And I go, yeah, man, I was like old hippy dippy at the time, It was then that he realized that I wasn't programming. And it was after we got back for a while, and I said, Charlie, I got to go. He said, yeah, you're still thinking, aren't you? And I said, yeah, I'm still thinking.
But this didn't seem to bother Charlie that much. He still had a very large group of followers, and his ego and his need for control grew. He would now more frequently refer to himself as God in front of his followers and really enjoyed indoctrinating them.
He just hung his arms out, and bow his head. And we know what he meant. Charlie would talk about how he was Jesus and the devil all in one, and all men were, but he was more the epitome of it.
At the end of 1968, the Beatles released their White Album, which turned out to be a big influence on Charlie. One song in particular, named Helter Skelter, meant a lot to him. He felt that the song was code that he interpreted as signifying the start of a race war.
When the Beatles' White Album came out, Charlie listened to it over and over and over and over again. He was quite certain that the Beatles had tapped in to his spirit, the truth, that everything was going to come down, that the black man was going to rise. It wasn't that Charlie listened to the White Album and started following what he thought the Beatles were saying. It was the other way around. He thought that the Beatles were talking about what he had been expounding for years. Every single song on the White Album, he felt that they were singing about us. The song Helter Skelter, he was interpreting that to mean the blacks were going to go up and the whites were going to go down.
Charlie then started to preach an Armageddon gospel to his followers, which he called Helter Skelter.
The black man was going to win this war, but he said Blackie only knows what Whitey's told him to do. And they're not going to be able to handle the reins of power, so they're going to have to turn over the reins to those white people who had survived Helter Skelter, i.e. Charles Manson and his family. Then he said, we're going to come out of the bottomless pit, and we'll take over the leadership of the world.
By now, this was all Charlie was preaching about, the end of the world, the race war, and how his Manson family would reign in the end days. And the atmosphere at the ranch just changed completely, and it intensified more and more as each day passed. His devotion for music never left though, and on the 23rd of March in 1969, Charlie went to Cielo Drive where Terry Melcher lived. He wanted to still try and convince Terry to publish his music. But he was met by Sharon Tate's photographer, who told Charlie he had to leave, and he had to leave by the back alley. Charlie was infuriated by this. He felt humiliated by the way they treated him. From here on, his behavior just became more and more erratic, and he started to unravel, but his followers still kept him on a pedestal. In May of 1969, Charlie was buying illegal substances from a dealer, and it all just went to hell. There was some sort of disagreement between the two, and Charlie ended up shooting the dealer. And this was a big deal to him because he believed that the dealer was part of the Black Panther group. Now, the Black Panthers were a revolutionary organization with an ideology of black nationalism, socialism, and armed self-defense, especially against police brutality. And this all played into Charlie's philosophy, and he became paranoid after this incident. He told his followers that he believed that the Black Panthers would come for him.
We started having guards at the ranch, hiding in the haystack in various places. They had field phones laid out between the front of the ranch and the back of the ranch. Charlie was getting pretty panicky and intense and high-strung and frightened.
Police also started to get suspicious of Charlie and his group. They suspected that they were involved in some illegal activities like dealing narcotics and prostitution, but they had no proof. So they really wanted to find a way to go to the ranch to get a better look of what was really going on there, but they were unsuccessful. Police actually eventually managed to arrest Charlie for some petty crimes, but they were surprised to see that very quickly someone showed up to bail him out, and that was Gary Hinman. Little did detectives know that this very man, Gary Hinman, would soon become the Manson family's murder victim. In July of 1969, 20-year-old Linda Kasabian became part of the Manson family. She was married with a daughter, but unfortunately her marriage was falling apart, and she desperately wanted to find a way to start a new life for herself and her daughter. She met Catherine Scher, who everybody called Gypsy, and she confided in her. Gypsy was part of the Manson family and assured Linda that she was welcome to come and live with them at the ranch.
I told Linda that we were a group of people that took care of each other and loved each other, and we were all one.
Linda decided to take Gypsy up on her offer and move to the Spahn Ranch, and she was immediately flattered by how happy everybody was and how everybody welcomed her, and she just felt right at home. She also felt comfortable to raise her daughter there because there were many other children that her daughter could play with, and it just seemed like a really lovely environment. Gypsy also told Linda all about Charlie and how amazing he was and how important he was to everybody, and Linda became extremely excited to meet him. But someone else caught Linda's eye, and that was Tex Watson. So now Linda had a new home at the ranch and a brand new love interest, Tex, and she really felt like she wanted to contribute somehow. She then thought about her husband's friend who had inherited a lot of money. Linda knew that this friend of her husband kept the money in his trailer, so she went over to the trailer and stole $5,000 from him and gave it to the Manson family. And this is when Linda finally got to meet Charlie. But then Linda's husband and the friend that she stole the money from showed up at the ranch. They wanted their money back. Linda was petrified and she hid. But Charlie was calm and invited the two men into his cabin. Nobody knows what was said between Charlie and the two men, but not too long afterwards, the two men left the cabin, got into their truck, and left. This made Linda feel so safe. It made her feel like Charlie would just always protect her. Charlie was now really starting to preach about Armageddon a lot to his followers and preparing them for what he claimed was going to happen. And this is when Linda got to hear for the first time what they believed, and she just believed it too.
Charlie said there was going to be a racial war and that white man was going down and black man would be on top.
Gary Hinman was a music teacher that lived in Topanga Canyon, and he was also Charlie's friend, but not a follower. He often also sold illegal substances to the Manson family. But on the 31st of July 1969, Charlie sent Susan Atkins and Bobby Beausoleil to extort money and property from Gary Hinman. When Gary refused to give them anything, Bobby went to Charlie and told him about it. Charlie then went to Gary's home with a sword. They tied Gary up and Charlie sliced a piece of Gary's ear off. Charlie then told Bobby to finish Gary off and to make it look like the Black Panthers did it. Bobby tortured, stabbed and smothered Gary with a pillow, and on the wall near his body, he used Gary's blood to write Political Piggy.
The Manson piggies were the white establishment. Manson wanted to start Helter Skelter by murdering white people and framing the black man for it.
He also took the blood and left a paw print on the wall so that the murder could point to the Black Panthers as Charlie instructed him to do.
Allegedly to place suspicion for the murder on the Black Panther political group, slogans were daubed on the wall in blood, along with a panther paw print. The murder attracted little attention, but in less than a month's time, the family would commit a crime that would make the world sit up and take notice.
After the murder of Gary Hinman, Charlie really started to get paranoid. And to make matters worse, there were some people who decided to leave the Manson family. Charlie also realized at this point that he was not going to get a record deal, and facing that reality broke him. Charlie was also really upset that Bobby Beausoleil was now in prison after he was arrested for the murder of Gary Hinman. At the time of his arrest, Bobby was actually driving Gary's car, and when police searched the car, they found the knife Bobby used and bloodstains on his clothes.
So we're all up there and we got these fires going and we got this big problem that came up. I had to go shoot somebody for Tex. Bobby's in prison.
But Charlie and his Manson family never managed to get Bobby out of prison.
Helter Skelter.
Charlie declared to some of his followers that they would have to start working on getting the race war going. In the evening, he told 4 of his followers, Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian, to go get knives and a pair of extra clothing each. He only revealed their true mission to Tex, but the girls just thought that they were going to rob a home, as they did many times before. He also instructed the group to leave a sign before they leave the scene of the crime. He said, quote, "Leave something witchy."
Did you tell the women to do their witchy things?
I said, if you're going to do something, leave something witchy.
Tex drove himself and the 3 women over to what they knew as Terry Melcher's house. But Terry had moved out, and now Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski were renting the home. While on their way there, the 4 Manson family members all did speed. Sharon Tate was a 26-year-old beautiful actress and was 8.5 months pregnant. Her husband, Roman Polanski, a famous film director, was away on business in the UK at the time, completely unaware of the horror that awaited his expecting wife.
Sharon and Roman had an absolutely wonderful relationship. She worshipped the ground he walked on. I was staying with Sharon, and she came in from a trip into town. She came back with this little grin on her face and did the shoulders like this, and she says, "Sis, we're pregnant." And I said, "What are you talking about? We're pregnant. Roman and I are going to have a baby." And I just started crying, and she started crying, and we did the little dance, and it was a wonderful moment.
On the 9th of August, shortly after midnight, the 4 Manson family members made their way over to the beautiful home in Cielo Drive in Bel Air. This fateful evening, Sharon Tate had some of her friends over. Jay Sebring, who was a celebrity hairdresser, 25-year-old Abigail Folger, who was a coffee heiress, and Wojciech Rakowski, who was Abigail's boyfriend and also a close friend of Roman Polanski. When the 4 members of the family arrived at the address, Tex Watson got out of the car and cut the phone lines. They then invaded the property, and as they made their way up the driveway, they saw a car approaching. Stephen Parent, only 18 years old, was leaving the property after visiting with the caretaker. He stopped when he saw the group coming, and that is when Tex shot him 4 times and murdered him. Tex then ordered Linda to go through the deceased man's pockets, and she did as she was told and got his wallet. Patricia Krenwinkel and Susan Atkins went with Tex, and they got into the home by climbing through a window. Tex then ordered Linda to go to the back of the home and to keep watch.
The screams that I heard coming from the house were blood-curdling, chilling screams, screaming for your life. And I couldn't tell if they were male or female. They were just screams.
Linda claims that she was petrified and had no idea that this was the plan all along. She said she was so scared that she just couldn't move.
Former All-American high school kid Tex Watson was reported to tell its residents, "I am the devil, and I've come to do the devil's business."
The Manson family then proceeded to viciously attack everyone in the home. Tex beat Wojciech Rakowski in the head with a gun numerous times until he died. As Linda was still keeping watch at the back of the home, she saw a man come out of the home, and he was covered in blood.
And I saw a man, and he had blood all over his face, and he looked right into my eyes, and he was dying.
was that I felt he was dying because of me.
Linda then witnessed Tex stab the man further. Next, she saw a woman in a white dress covered in blood. It was Abigail Folger. She was running for her life and screaming for her mom, but Patricia Krenwinkel caught up to her and stabbed her over and over. Susan Atkins listened to how Sharon Tate begged for her life and the life of her unborn baby, but she had no empathy for her. In fact, Susan Atkins told a terrified Sharon Tate, quote, "Look, bitch, I don't have any mercy on you. You're gonna die." Linda contemplated running away, but she was too scared. So she went over to the car and waited for the rest of her group there. It wasn't long until Tex, Susan, and Patricia made their way over to the car, and they were covered in blood. Patricia actually complained in the car and said that she had stabbed Abigail too hard, and in the process of murdering this woman, she injured herself. In all, 102 stab wounds were inflicted on 4 victims. The 5th victim, as I mentioned, was shot. Left dead were actress Sharon Tate, who was 8.5 months pregnant at the time, Jay Sebring, Wojciech Frykowski, Abigail Folger, and Stephen Parent. They used Sharon's blood to write the word pig on the front door, and the housekeeper discovered the bodies the next day. Police were stunned when they arrived at the scene of the crime, and as you can imagine, the news spread like wildfire.
In a scene described by one investigator as reminiscent of a weird religious rite, 5 persons, including actress Sharon Tate, were found dead at the home of Miss Tate and her husband, screen director Roman Polanski. Miss Tate was 8 months pregnant.
Police called and informed Roman Polanski that his young pregnant wife had been brutally murdered. He was in absolute shock and he was completely devastated.
The house is open now. We see a lot of blood all over the place. Cradles, baby clothes, and that's all.
And as we know, police always have to rule out the people closest to the victims, and this is exactly what they did with Roman Polanski. But his alibi checked out. He was definitely in Europe at the time that the murders took place at his home, and he also passed a polygraph examination. The only problem was that police had no idea who could have done this or why, and Hollywood went into a panic, and a lot of celebrities stepped up their security, bought guns, pepper spray, whatever they could to just make themselves feel safer. After they committed the murders, the 4 family members got rid of their bloody clothing by throwing it over a hill. They got dressed in clean clothes and made their way back to Spahn Ranch. Once they got there, Charlie actually criticized them, reportedly, for doing a messy job. After that, they all went and got some sleep as if nothing had happened. When they woke up, they all went and watched the news along with the rest of the members of their group. The only thing was that the other members had no idea that they were sitting amongst the murderers. Only a couple of hours later, Charlie, along with Tex Watson, Patricia Krenwinkel, Leslie Van Houten, and Linda Kasabian, drove around looking for more victims. Their first plan was to break into the church, murder the pastor, and hang him from a cross. But they were unsuccessful because they could not make their way into the church. But sadly, they soon found their victims. On the 10th of August 1969, in the early hours of the morning, Charlie and his followers made their way to the house of supermarket executive 44-year-old Tate-LaBianca and his wife, 38-year-old Rosemary. Charlie reportedly told his followers that how they murdered the night before was not good enough and it was too risky, and he was going to show them how to do it right. He made entry into the beautiful home all by himself. He went and tied up the LaBiancas and then walked out to the car to the group and ordered Tex, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten to go in and finish the job. Charlie then drove off. Once he left, his followers stabbed the LaBiancas to death.
Leslie Van Houten told Diane Lake that stabbing Rosemary LaBianca was fun. The more she did it, the more she enjoyed it.
There were a total of 169 stab wounds, and once again, Charlie's followers left messages behind.
This fork was the fork that Patricia Krenwinkel used to carve war in the abdomen of Lino LaBianca after he was killed, and then stuck it into his chest.
Among words written in the victim's blood was the phrase, Helter Skelter.
Once they were done, this evil group of people had a shower, had something to eat in their victim's kitchen, and proceeded to hitchhike back to the ranch. Once the bodies of the LaBiancas were found, every detective in Los Angeles worked hard to find out who committed these murders. Police thought it could be the same people who murdered Sharon Tate and her friends, or it could have been a copycat. Sadly, even with a massive police operation underway, police had no idea who could have committed the murders. They exhausted every lead they got, but had no luck in catching the killers. On August 13th, only 3 days after the LaBiancas were murdered, Charlie asked Linda to go and visit Bobby Beausoleil in prison. He was still behind bars for the murder of Gary Hinman. Linda saw this as the perfect opportunity to make her escape. She wanted to take her daughter with her, but she said she couldn't do it without making the rest of the group suspicious. So she left her daughter at the ranch. Yeah. And I guess I would have been sort of okay with this if she had immediately gone and gotten some police and went back to fetch her daughter, but she didn't. She actually fled to New Mexico and went into hiding there. On the 25th of August, Charlie instructed one of his followers named Steve Grogan to go and kill former film stuntman Donald Shear. Charlie said that Donald had passed information onto the police and for that he had to die. And in reality, this was not true at all. On the 1st of September 1969, a boy found the gun that the family members used in the Sharon Tate murders. The boy found it under a bush near his home and immediately went and told his dad about it. His dad phoned the LAPD and unfortunately they failed to do a proper investigation. On the 12th of October 1969, Charlie was arrested at the ranch along with 27 of his followers for car theft and possession of illegal weapons. All of the children on the ranch were taken into state care, and this is when Linda came back for her daughter. But the police at this point were still not linking the Tate and LaBianca murders to the Manson family at all. On the 6th of November 1969, while incarcerated in LA on car theft charges, one of Charlie's followers, Susan Atkins, confessed to a fellow inmate that she played a part in the Tate and LaBianca murders. She confessed it all to the inmate and even told her that their family had this list of celebrities that they still planned to murder. Some of the people on that list included Tom Jones, Steve McQueen, Richard Burton, Elizabeth Taylor, and even Frank Sinatra. Susan was bragging about what she did, and after listening to everything she had to say, this inmate, she told, went and told the authorities. And this is what broke the case. 6 days later, a man named Al Springer, who had worked on Spahn Ranch and spent some time with Charlie and his group, revealed to the LAPD that in the middle of August, Charlie had bragged to him about, quote, knocking off 5 pigs the other night. On the 17th of November, Danny DiCarlo implicated Charlie in the Spahn Ranch murder of Shorty Shear, and also suggested that others at the ranch might also have been responsible for the Tate murders, but he told detectives he would be too afraid to testify. On the 1st of December of 1969, the LAPD issued arrest warrants for Patricia Krenwinkel, Leslie Van Houten, Tex Watson, Linda Kasabian, and Charles Manson. Linda Kasabian was lucky and struck a deal with prosecutors. She agreed to testify against Charlie and her fellow members of the Manson family in return for immunity.
If there was to be any kind of sense made to this nonsense, then the truth did need to come out.
On the 24th of July 1970, the trial of the Tate and LaBianca murders opened in LA. Charlie Manson and 3 of his followers, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten, were on trial.
After 4 long and anxious months, Charles Manson and his loyal killers were arrested and brought to trial. On the left, Susan Atkins, Pat Krenwinkel in the middle. On the right, Leslie Van Houten. Manson was still calling the shots, with his faithful followers outside the courtroom.
We're going to stay here until Charlie's out.
And inside.
Every day we'd meet, and he'd decide, well, today I want you each to stand up and hold your hands in some stupid symbols. You're going to get up and scream, "Yell gray mare." You're going to get up and
burn an X on your forehead.
Right, burn an X in your head.
The X is still visible.
A little, or a lot.
A lot.
Oh, okay, I don't even see it anymore. I figured as I age, it'll look like part of my aging.
Now you must be thinking, what about Tex Watson? Well, Tex actually fled back to Texas in October of 1969. He was arrested in November, but he and his lawyers fought extradition to California for 9 months. When he was eventually extradited to California, he stopped eating and lost 55 pounds and went into a catatonic state. He was admitted to Atascadero State Hospital for a 90-day evaluation period to determine if he was fit to stand trial. He stayed there until February 1971, when he was deemed fit to stand trial. In the meantime, Charlie and the 3 other Manson family members' trial continued. On the 20th of November, Charlie announced that he wanted to testify. He made a strange statement saying, quote, "The children that come at you with knives are your children. You taught them. I didn't teach them. I just tried to help them stand up." End quote. 10 days later, defense attorney Ronald Hughes failed to show up in court. He was never seen again, which led to people speculating that he was murdered by the family members who were still at the ranch. There are many people who believe to this day that the Manson family were responsible for many more murders, including the murder of Ronald Hughes, but there is not enough proof. On the 25th of January 1971, the jury convicted Charlie, Patricia, Leslie, and Susan of first-degree murder for the Tate and LaBianca murders, and 3 months later, they were all sentenced to death. Charlie maintained that he was innocent all the way. On the 12th of October 1971, Tex Watson was convicted on 7 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder. 9 days later, he was also sentenced to death. But in 1972, California abolished the death penalty, and all of their death sentences were changed to life imprisonment. Charlie was transferred to Folsom Prison, and then in May of 1976, he was sent to Vassarville Prison, where he remained for 9 years. In 1984, a fellow inmate set Charlie on fire and caused serious burns on large parts of his body. The inmate claimed that he did this because God told him to kill Charles Manson. After this incident, Charlie was transferred to San Quentin Prison. Charlie then did a prison interview in 1987, and in this interview, he comes across as both normal at times and then definitely as abnormal too.
You don't feel guilty at all?
There's no need to feel guilty. I haven't done anything I'm ashamed of.
Are you mad? Do you feel like
In March of 1997, Charlie was denied parole for the 9th time.
What has Mr. Manson learned in the almost 23 years that he has been in prison for these murders? In my estimation, Mr. Manson has learned nothing.
Charlie would go on to do quite a few interviews, and honestly, they are fascinating to watch.
If you are me and I am you, everything you do is for you, is for me too. And then who's responsible for a calm together over me right now? It's all his fault. My words. I live and die by my words.
Is Charlie Manson crazy?
Or whatever that means. Sure, he's crazy as mad as a hatter. What difference does it make? You got your rings. You think I don't understand your blue rings and your yellow biscuit? you think there's anything around? Yeah. I don't fit in society, and I am incompetent. I'm definitely incompetent.
No, that's not what I said.
Well, I say that. I say that. No, there's nothing wrong with being incompetent because you don't have to do as much. I don't have no bad going for nothing. I don't judge. I hardly even think about too much. It's hard for me to remember breakfast. In fact, if I didn't have 2 or 3 girls to help me, I would pretty much be lost and I wouldn't know what the hell I'm doing.
Be a part of whatever it is you're a part of.
I'm brand new. Everything I do is always brand new.
Isn't this an act right now?
What isn't an act? So if the people in the underworld are knocking people down in the streets,
that society really is missing and that you can tell them about?
society knows when it wants to know that it's just a jellyfish and is only controlled by the people who want to move the sheep around. All this paper comes from trees. It's a shame to waste all your trees. Yeah. Helter Skelter simply means confusion.
At first, the girls put on a really good show for Charlie, and they were still taking orders from him while they were still on trial. But after spending some years behind bars, it seemed like they managed to gain some clarity.
Do you have nightmares?
No, it isn't in my sleep because I've incorporated the loss in my days. Every day I wake up and know that I'm a destroyer.
I guess when I start thinking of myself, mostly the word that comes to mind is what a coward that I found myself to be when I look at the situation and what I allowed myself and where I allowed myself to go. And I can only tell you, I have been with something that started only as one woman with one man that turned into one of the most disastrous, most horrendous, most abominable situations that could possibly come out of it.
And I think that it was a very neat little package that he did to make sure that everybody else did his dirty work. Sometimes it's been easier for me to live with myself the way the prosecutor defines me. It's almost been easier to say, you're right. No good from the day I was born. I don't know when enough punishment will be enough for me. You know, I take offense to the fact that 25 years later, Manson doesn't own up to his share in this. I take offense to that. I take responsibility for my part. And part of my responsibility was helping create him. You know, being a follower does not excuse.
As you saw and heard in the previous clips, Patricia Krenwinkel and Leslie Van Houten took responsibility for the parts they played in the murders. But Susan Atkins didn't exactly do that.
I lied at the grand jury. I lied at the trial and said that I killed people that I in fact did not. I live with that knowledge. I live with the fact that people think that I killed a pregnant woman, 8.5 months pregnant.
The district attorney says you drank Sharon Tate's blood.
I never did that.
The district attorney says that you said it was better than orgasm.
I never said that to the district attorney. No, I had to forgive myself. And that's not something that I did overnight. That's not something that I think I've totally accomplished. It's a day-by-day process. There are times when I lay and I cry because of what I did, because of the pain that I caused so many people.
Can you get out the words and say to Sharon Tate's parents that you're sorry for what you did that night?
You ask hard questions. There are no words to describe what I feel. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Those words are so overused and inadequate for what I feel.
Did you or did you not kill Sharon Tate?
No, I did not.
I thought you told me earlier, though, that why you felt so bad is that
I was
you're
involved.
craving forgiveness for what you did.
I was involved. I was there. I participated. It's the same thing as actually taking a life by law. Maybe I could have stopped it. I didn't.
So even though Susan does come across as being remorseful for being a part of everything that happened, she claims now that she never murdered anyone. And I don't know about you, but I don't believe her at all. But on the 15th of July 2008, Susan Atkins was denied parole. She applied for parole and asked for compassionate release due to the fact that she had been diagnosed with terminal brain cancer and only had months to live. In September of 2009, Susan passed away. Her husband released the following statement. Susan passed away peacefully, surrounded by friends and loved ones. Her last whispered words was Amen. No one on the face of the earth worked as hard as Susan did to right an unrightable wrong. In April of 2012, Charlie was denied parole for the 12th time after he bragged to a psychologist that he was a very dangerous man. And on the 19th of November 2017, Charles Manson passed away from natural causes at the age of 83 in a California hospital. And now I'm getting ready to give you my opinion on Charles Manson and the Manson family for what it's worth. And to be honest, I don't think everybody is going to be so happy with what I have to say about it. Let me start off by saying that there seems to always be this recurring theme in all of the cases that I research, and that is bad parenting, like really bad parenting. And it just shows me that it has a severe effect on a child and how it forms a person, even up until the child becomes an adult. I'm not making an excuse for Charles Manson here, but we have to recognize that he really had a bad childhood. I don't think he had any good examples. And I can't even imagine everything that he went through. That being said, I still believe that we all have free will, and regardless of what we go through in life, we all need to take responsibility for the choices that we make with that free will. I think Charles Manson didn't understand the world. He only knew prison, and every time he was released, it was like he was bewildered. He didn't know what to do with his life. It's like the equivalent of taking us and just releasing us into the jungle with no guide, you know? And I think he was just used to a life of crime. That's all he knew. And I know there are so many people out in the world still today that believe that Charles Manson was innocent. I am not one of them. I believe that he was guilty. I believe that he ordered his followers to go and carry out those murders. That is what I believe. I differ somewhat on the motive. I'm not sure what his motive was. I'm not sure if it was because he didn't get the recording contract, or if he really believed that Helter Skelter was telling him something. I'm not sure. I told this story based on what was the most popular opinion on this, but I'm not completely sure if I agree with it. So I'd love to hear your take on this and what you think, and please feel free to disagree on anything with me. I don't mind. I'm not going to get upset about it. But my opinion is that he is guilty and he would be committing other crimes anyway. He says that himself. So I think everybody that was involved with this, including the woman, including Tex Watson, ended up exactly where they needed to be, including Charles Manson. Regarding the question if Charlie was crazy, I honestly don't know. I know you've been watching those clips of him and thinking that man is insane, and he surely does come across that way. But part of me feels like he's putting on a show. Like he just doesn't care anymore, and he's just putting on the show for the interviewer and for the world, because he realized his life was over and it was just all about entertaining us at that point. I actually think at times he has some very wise words and says things that really make a lot of sense. It feels strange to say that, but it's the truth. I think he was actually a really intelligent person. He just had a really rough life and he made horrible, evil choices. The crimes that the Manson family committed were brutal. It was brutal what they did to Sharon Tate, being 8.5 months pregnant. It makes me sick to my stomach. All of her friends who were just visiting her. I feel so bad for Stephen Perrin for just going to visit the caretaker. I mean, it's absolutely horrific. The LaBiancas were just in their home, just spending a normal night together as a couple. And here comes Charles Manson, ties them up and orders his followers to end their lives in such a brutal way. I mean, there's no way getting around what they did there. It was absolutely disgusting and evil. But I do look forward to hearing from you and to hear what you think about this. Please feel free to disagree with me and to share your opinions in the comment section. Other than that, I hope you stay safe and I will see you in the next one.